Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about storytelling and player agency. This is something I've touched on in a ton of videos. I will try to link as many as I can below, but there are a lot of them. I wanted to make a specific video on this because I kind of feel like the need to laser focus on the fact that storytelling and player agency are a little contradictory. They're a little bit at odds. And at some point, if you want to make a computer role-playing game, you need to decide, like consciously, which one of those takes precedence in your game. Now, of course, I have a bias here. I love player agency over all else. The main reason for this is most likely I am not a writer who decided to make computer role-playing games, which there are those people out there. They either do write books or they want to write books, and they've ended up making computer role-playing games, and you see it in their games. They are story first, story focused, story priority. That is not mine. I am a game player who frequently found himself the game master of the game sessions. So when I played tabletop role-playing games and later became a maker of computer role-playing games, that history meant I was used to making settings and letting players play around in them, and the stories would just emerge. This is probably the origin of why I think player agency over story is the way for me to go, and it's super important, and it's the choice I make at the very beginning of all my RPG designs. This is also the reason I recommend the order in which you make an RPG. Start with the setting, then do the story, then do the system mechanics. Many of you have said, oh, well, that's not the way I want to do it. I think of the story first. That's fine. That's not the way I do it. And I will give you reasons why that isn't the way I want to do it. But I'm just going to tell you, you don't have to do things the way I do it. I just want you to understand that role-playing games can be made in very different ways, and you should consciously decide the way you're doing it. Or not only will the game suffer, but the people who are making the game with you will be very confused and not know what you're trying to make. Now, you can make a role-playing game where the story has precedence. And you can tell what kind of role-playing games these are when you play them. There will be little to no freedom in the player character creation. You won't be able to pick the class or the race or the gender or the name or the background. Sometimes you even wonder, like, what do I get to pick? And sometimes it's something minor, like, do you specialize in this or this? Or, what initial trait do you want to start with or something? Sometimes it's something very small. Then as you're playing the game, you realize that the story is very linear. You have to do Act 1 before you can do Act 2. And those particular acts have very specific endings. You can only do it a certain way. And then Act 2 happens, and then you have to do that in a particular way. And then that act ends. And then when you finally get to the end of the game itself, it ends in a very particular way. And along the way, you'll discover that a lot of non-player characters can't be killed because they are so important to the story. And the story is the number one goal of the person in charge of the design of this game, that they had to make NPCs unkillable because otherwise there was no way to convey the story to you. But most importantly, if you talk to people who've played the games later, if players compare stories on a story-focused game, those comparisons are going to be almost exactly the same. Oh, did you do this? Yes. Did you find this? Yes. Did you use this? Yes. Because there's not much variation. The story had to unfold a certain way, and this was decided before the game was even beginning to be made. Any variation on their storyline is how a particular combat went. Yes, they eventually killed this enemy, but maybe how they killed them was different, or maybe it took them multiple tries, or maybe because they had selected slightly different abilities, the combat rhythm was different. Maybe the items they used were different. But the major story events all unfolded exactly the same way. Those bad guys did get killed. These people were found. These events unfolded, and then the game ended the exact same way, or pretty much 99% the exact same way for everyone who played it. Obviously, if you played any of my games, I prefer the opposite to all of this. I prefer you having a blank slate player character, or as close to you as you can get it. Frequently, there has to be some event that explains why they're here. Like in Fallout, it was you drew the short straw, you're leaving the vault to try to find a water chip. In Skyrim, you can make any character you want of any race, gender, abilities, whatever, but you were found as a convicted of some crime which is unspecified, and you're being taken to your execution. So these are very much blank slate beginnings. There's like one pen put in to explain why the game is starting this way, but everything else is up for the player to choose. Again, it's a very open world. You can go anywhere you want. It's not saying everywhere is going to be just as easy, and some places will smack you down if you try to go into them early, but you can go there. And then the stories aren't linear. You can encounter these NPCs in any order. You can do their stories in any order. The main game unfolds in different ways. Maybe there's a war going on and you choose side A over side B. Or maybe there's a bad guy and you choose, rather than to oppose the bad guy, you join the bad guy. These are all really cool ways of making a player agency first game. Any of those NPCs can be killed, including the bad guy at the end. So, of course, you're not joining them. Maybe you're going to kill the bad guy and take over their evil operation. Or maybe you destroyed the bad guys so you could undo all of their evil. I love this because with all these different quests that you do and all the different story endings, you end up with a lot of different results that all stem from the player, what the player chose to do, how they chose to do it, and how those different results came to be. Now, my games, of course, varied a lot in how all those things worked. In Fallout, you always finished the game being kicked out. No matter what you did, you got kicked out of the vault at the end. Now, you could handle that slightly differently, but that always happened. Later on, when I was doing Temple, I didn't like that. So there was the big bad demon at the bottom, and I was like, maybe you don't kill her. Maybe you join her. Maybe you work for her. Or maybe you've been so evil on the way to finishing the story that when you show up, you're like, you think you're evil? Look at what I did. You work for me now. So I love that there were all those different endings. And when people would talk about how they finished the game, they would have wildly different experiences. But what you need to do is, if you're making a computer role-playing game, you need to decide what you care most about right at the beginning. Do you care most about telling your story or letting the player have lots of agency? But that, because once you make this decision, you need to telegraph that to the player so they're not frustrated by the game they're making, that you made, that they're now playing. Now, here's all the different ways you can mess that up. You can let them make any kind of player character that they want, all wildly different backgrounds and skills and all, and then none of it matters. Not a single bit of it matters. The game rolls out the same way. People treat you the same way. You a criminal? Somehow they don't care. Did you have royal blood? Doesn't matter. You ending up king or queen of the country happens anyway. Doesn't matter. Frequently, I play games where I'm told or I'm heavily implied that I can go anywhere I want, but then I'm restricted. I can't. Oh, you want to go there? Well, you can't get past that bridge yet until you finish all these quests in this area, until you resolve this area. Oh, you want to go up in those mountains? Nope, can't do that yet. Oh, you want to go past those mountains? Oh, you can't fly yet. And it's okay if you have a few of those, but when the game is so heavily restricted that you can tell, nope, they wanted you to finish this, then you went over here and you did all of this, and then this unlocked, and then this unlocked. Sometimes it's as simple as you see a bridge and you start to cross and it goes, nope, you have not finished everything in this area. You cannot continue forward. And you're like, what the F? It's very gamey. Another way you can mess it up is if you give the player choices for how to do quests or how the story goes, but none of them matter, and they always get the same conclusion anyway. So they were basically false choices. So it didn't matter whether you helped this NPC or opposed them. They still ended up being in charge of some faction, or they still ended up being killed. This is just frustrating to the player because you're kind of promising one thing and then delivering another. So I think it's very important whenever you start a computer role-playing game that you ask yourself the very first thing you do before you make a single system mechanic or a single story element, you go, what is the most important thing for you? Do you want to tell your story your way, which can be very powerful and impactful, and it's a very good way of making an RPG? Or do you want to tell a story that the player determines? Do you want this to be a player-driven story, which can be very, very powerful in a different way? Neither of these are the right way, neither of these are the wrong way, but you need to decide it at the beginning so you don't do a lot of things that will frustrate and confuse the player because they're thinking they're getting one thing and instead they're getting another. Now, some players prefer one of these over another, so there's no right way to do it. No matter which way you do it, there's some players are going to go, I don't like games like that, and there's some players are going, oh, that's great. But because there are always bad ways to implement your decision, whether you want to make it story-focused or player agency, you can make a bad version of those and then go, oh, maybe that wasn't the right way to do it. No, there is no right way to make an RPG. There's just a lot of bad ways to implement your decision. So I hope this made it very clear. What I'm trying to say here is that you need to decide early on, probably the first thing you want to do. Are you trying to tell a specific story, or are you trying to make a role-playing game about player agency? Once you do that, a lot of the decisions you make after that, everything from the story to the setting to the particular system mechanics you put in, will be constrained by that very first decision you made. Whew. I hope this helps you make your role-playing game.